Annie with you then through until midday today. Now listen to this, because I think you'll find this illuminating and interesting. You know those little urges you get when you see somebody you're attracted to? What if you don't get them? What if the idea of sex just didn't actually register with you, or in fact even repulsed you? These are some of the everyday experiences of asexual people who, for a variety of reasons, have no desire for sex. Michael Doré is asexual and joins me in the studio, along with Mark Carrigan, a researcher from the University of Warwick. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
Michael, let's see how far back we can go. You're 28 years old now.
Yep.
When did you first realise that something perhaps was different about you?
Good question. Well, I mean, I think one of the interesting things about asexuality and the self-discovery is that it's precipitated not so much by a change in yourself, but by a change in those around you. So up to about the age of 11 or 12, I, like most of my peers, just had no interest at all in sex. Some of my peers would even make fun of, people who were already into all that sort of yucky adult stuff.
Yeah,
you
were just a, happy 11-year-old, going about your business. Presumably, you were at an all-male school, is that right?
I was at an all-male school. So at some point, it was around, I think 11 or 12, I noticed that all my peers started to, if you like, get women in a big way.
So all the other lads were saying, whoa, look at her.
Yeah, I mean, people would obsess over women in magazines. People would comment constantly on, who's hot, and they would just talk about women all the time. And I couldn't relate to it at all. I mean, I haven't come from a puritanical background in any way, but it was essentially like I was missing another sense. I just couldn't understand what other people were talking about.
And did you think at this stage, you thought, well, maybe I'm a bit of a late developer, I'll grow into this?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's that unusual for people to develop at different rates. Sure. I mean, give or take a year. So at that point, I mean, I certainly didn't make a big deal about it. I assumed that, like everybody else, I eventually would, well, come round, as people put it. Mm-hmm. A few years later, though, nothing had changed on my part, and I began to know at that point that there was something different about me, let's say.
So if, an attractive lady walked past you, a young girl walked past you, nice legs, nice boobs or whatever, beautiful eyes, didn't do anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be totally blind to that sort of thing. I mean, I can certainly appreciate people aesthetically. It's like essentially looking at a beautiful painting, if you like.
Right.
But I mean, I would certainly have no arousal or no desire to sort of get to know people in anything other than a platonic sense.
As you were getting older, and clearly your friends, your peers were getting girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, how was that making you feel?
That's interesting. I didn't particularly like being different, but on the other hand, it wasn't something that in itself was causing me any discomfort. So, I mean, since I didn't actually have any particular desire to get to know people in any other way than as a friend, I didn't feel I just had to go along with the pack, if you like.
Yeah.
Even so, I still wasn't all that open about my asexuality, simply because there was quite a high stigma attached to not finding women attractive. I mean, really, homophobia can be a bit of an obsession with, especially, I think, guys at that age. Or this was what it was like in the mid-90s. It might be a lot better now. And so, you get all the sort of normal homophobic bullying if people find out you're not interested in women. So
they made the assumption because you weren't interested in women, you would therefore be interested in men.
Yeah.
But actually not interested in men either.
No, not at all. And I tried to explain this, of course, but I mean, to many people, the idea that you're not interested in either sex is really unthinkable. So if you say that you're not interested in women, then that means that you must be a repressed gay.
Yeah. So was there a point where you were feeling distressed about this, or was it just a case of if you've never had something, you don't miss it?
I didn't miss it at all. I mean, I didn't like standing out. I didn't like some of the social implications of it. But as far as thinking I was missing something, well, no, like you say.
I mean, you're not an unattractive chap. You've got lovely blue eyes, dark hair. You're good build. There must be times. Lovely smile. You've finally smiled at me. You know, there must have been times when girls would want to hit on you, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, of course I've had that. I was not happy, even though some of these people are wonderful people and I wanted to be friends. I was not really happy about getting into any other kind of relationship, simply because I knew I was not going to be able to satisfy them sexually. And I think that most non-asexual people do eventually need to they do need their relationship to sort of go on to the next level.
Yeah. And you've never been able to take it to that next level.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I should talk a bit about, just if you mind, just talk a bit generally about relationships, because
Please do.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually a valid question, of course. First of all, do asexuals ever want relationships? Because, I mean, to many people, relationships and sex are very much tied up.
Yeah.
And the answer is an emphatic yes. I mean, many asexuals crave the emotional intimacy of a relationship just as much as anybody else. In fact, it's also worth mentioning that, like non-asexual people, many asexuals have a gender preference in their relationships, so they can identify as hetero-romantic, romantically attracted to the opposite sex, or gender, I should say, homo-romantic, attracted to the same gender, and you can guess what, biromantic and panromantic, and some aromantic. So a lot of asexuals get into relationships with people who are not asexual, and often these relationships work. I mean, there are a number of really wonderful success stories I know of relationships between people who are sexual and people who are not asexual. But I think the one common theme behind all these relationships is, well, first of all, openness, but second of all, compromise, really on both parts.
But it must be very difficult for you to contemplate having a long-term relationship where there is no sex involved at all.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, that would be great. The only problem is that if I was in a relationship with somebody who was not asexual, then
that's what I'm saying. It would be very difficult.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult for the other partner. I mean, I know of several cases, since I'm involved in the asexual community, and many asexuals are involved with relationships with people who are not asexual, and it is very hard on both partners. I mean, it's hard on the non-asexual partner because for a lot of people, it's actually an emotional thing. It's not so much just the physical pleasure of sex. It's that if the asexual partner keeps on not being able to fulfill their needs, it feels like being rejected inside a relationship. And of course, they can rationalise as much as they want. Like, the asexual can explain it. It's not that they don't love them; it's that they don't like sex. But it can be actually hard to accept that for.
All right,
a lot of people.
We'll stay with us. We're going to talk some more, and then we'll talk with Mark as well about the research that's going on into asexuality.
BBC Coventry and Warwickshire, the home of Annie Othen in the morning.
So we'll talk more on that subject in just a moment with both Michael and Phil Collins. And Heatwave, 9:25. Joining me in the studio is Michael J. Doré and Mark Carrigan. Now, Michael is an asexual, and he knew something was different when he was 11 or 12, and suddenly everyone started being attracted to girls, and he thought, you know, why not me? And you discovered that you were an asexual. Have you ever had sex at all?
No, I'm what's known as a repulsed asexual, meaning that I'm not somebody who'd be happy on compromising. There are other asexuals who do have sex and they're quite happy with it, and I think it's worth mentioning that I mean, this variation actually exists outside the asexual community. There are many people who are quite happy having sex with people they're not sexually attracted to, and there are many people who are horrified by the idea. So I guess I'd fall in the latter category, and it's not something I'd be happy about doing.
Okay, Mark, can we sort of get to this definition of it, because I'm still slightly confused, but particularly from what you've just said, where there are people who are asexual but they have sex. So how would you define it?
Well, this was actually one of the starting points for my own academic research, just because when I started to look into it, I found that while almost everyone in the asexual community agrees upon a shared definition of an asexual as someone who does not experience sexual desire, what that seems to mean in practice in the real context of people's lives varies a lot. As Michael has said, there are people who are repulsed by the idea of sex. There are those who are indifferent. There are those who don't want sex themselves but see it as a basically positive thing for other people. And there's a huge range of different orientations.
So the spectrum of asexuality is quite wide. So for you, presumably, you're probably at quite the acute end, because you are you call yourself a repulsive asexual.
Well, not repulsive.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
No, sorry, I should have said repulse. That's my fault, beg your pardon.
Yeah,
But
so
repulse.
I think that the basic definition of asexuality is agreed upon. An asexual is somebody who does not experience sexual attraction. That's the usual definition. But of course, how people actually interpret sexual attraction does vary person to person. But I mean, it's important to understand we're talking about actual sexual attraction because, for example, asexuality is not the same thing as lack of sex drive.
Right.
It's quite possible to be asexual but to have a sex drive.
It is?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I mean, there's an analogy that's sometimes used to explain this. Like, if you imagine that say you're a heterosexual man and you go to an island which is populated only by men, then you would still have the same sexual desires. But since if you confine your attention to the island, you're not sexually attracted to anybody. You're essentially asexual. And I would say that asexuals who have a sex drive are like that, except they are not sexually attracted to anybody.
You've spoken, Mark, in your research to a number of asexuals, and what I found interesting was the wide range of people how they identify themselves as asexual. You know, one here who said, "I'm simply uninterested in having sex, not repulsed." It's that word again. And if my partner insisted on having sex, I would oblige. Another one saying, "I find the idea of sex utterly disgusting. I honestly think I would vomit if I ever had sex." I mean, there's a wide range of respondents there.
Definitely, and I think, again, this topic of relationships is very interesting because this degree of variation, this diversity, in terms of how people are in relationships, it manifests itself in different ways. Because I was fascinated by when I started the research, contrary to my expectations, I found people who didn't just oblige to have sex with their partners, but actually genuinely enjoyed it without deriving sexual satisfaction from it. They talked about the emotional intimacy, the proximity, pleasing their partner.
Right. Having said that, we are in a world which there is so much sex around us, you know, I've got a pile of newspapers here. I can guarantee there'll be stories, pictures, surveys, all about sex. How does it, or does it, change your view of the world?
Maybe it might be a surprise in some ways that I consider myself, even though I'm a repulsed asexual, I consider myself quite sex positive. And of course, I mean, you talk about pictures. I don't like exploitation or anything like that, but I'm fully in favour of sexual liberation. I think if people want to express themselves sexually, that's fine by me.
I mean, if you saw a film where there was you go to the cinema and there's some footage there of a couple making out. How do you view that?
I would squirm slightly, but I think I reckon.
Okay. And the same that if you open a newspaper, and I'm sure I could probably find one in the papers today, and there's a standing picture of a girl probably on page 3 and she's standing there with her boobs out looking all seductive to the camera, how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, I'm sad if it seems exploitative in any way, but apart from that, I take the view that I don't have to read it, I don't have to buy the paper, and if other people enjoy that sort of thing, that's up to them, really.
Is there research to say whether this view and this attitude, I don't quite know how we describe it, is emotional, psychological?
I think the evidence suggests that it's both, and I think there might be some underlying biological predisposition to it,
yes.
But it's not just an inevitable consequence of biology. Because I think it's very interesting that until 2001, 2002, there wasn't really an asexual community. So what's happened in the last 10 years that's allowed these people to come together? I mean, the internet's played a big role in this, but I don't think the internet's the only factor.
So you've spoken that there is a bigger sexual community out there on the internet that you now converse with?
Yes, in fact, I mean, I'll give it just a shout out if that's okay.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so there's the biggest online asexual community is the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. This is asexuality.org, but if you want the forums, it's asexuality.org /EN. And I mean, anybody who's either thinks they may be asexual or is just interested or is an ally, then please introduce yourself.
How does it make you feel, Michael? I'm still trying to get to grips with this. Does it sadden you that you are like this? Is it just how it is for you and you get on with a very full and happy life? How does it manifest for you?
I think, I mean, like you say, I mean, I have a very happy life, and it's, in some sense, if you don't desire something, you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
I mean, I would prefer that asexuality was a lot better known. I think that's going to improve in future. I don't particularly like being a minority and being unable to relate to much of culture. I mean, that's not particularly pleasant, but it's not. For me, it's not a gigantic deal.
But it is. There are issues because you will not be following what is accepted as the society's norm in large part, where you're going to meet someone, perhaps get together, maybe have a family. All of those things presumably won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say I personally have been quite lucky. I mean, of course, I suffered quite a bit when I was at school, but since then...
In what way? Were you bullied, or...?
Yeah, I mean, I got the sort of normal homophobic treatment, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, of course, I don't want to dwell on that too much. I mean, just to say something more positive, I mean, my family are very accepting.
Yes, how do your family react to this? Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have one sister.
Yeah.
And yes, they're great. They're very accepting about the whole thing. So it's not a problem for me in that sense.
And you've talked to them about it?
Yes.
And what was their reaction when you spoke to them about it?
They were just fascinated. They thought, well, this explains a lot, I guess. Yeah. But, I mean, it's true, other people have been less fortunate. There is an expectation. I mean, I think maybe women more than men, that, you know, what you do is you get married, you have kids. I mean, it was worse maybe a few decades ago, but still to some extent now. And if you don't, then you're just outside what society expects of you.
It is what society, and I suppose people would say, would be the natural function of the male, which is to have sex and procreate and keep the species going, if we take it at its most basic level.
Yeah, and of course, to some extent, men are judged by, well, to put it crudely, how much sex they have. Like alpha males, in the sexual sense, are looked well upon.
Mark, you, as I say, done a lot of research into this. Is there any indication that people will be asexual because of something that has happened, or is that a different thing altogether?
I think it's largely a different thing. I think it'd be a mistake to rule it out as a possibility. Of the surveys I collected almost 200 surveys online, and there were 2 or 3 that very strongly hinted at issues like that.
Yes.
But for the great majority of people, there was absolutely no sign there was some underlying cause, that there was abuse or...
So how much research is going into this? Because we were saying, you know, that there may be emotional, psychological, but possibly also biological reasons as to why people are asexual. So how much research is going in? I know you're doing some.
It's still relatively limited. In the time I've been involved, the last 2 years, it's started to increase, but there's still now only 25 researchers I know of worldwide who are working on this, which is a shame because it's not just interesting in its own right. The way researchers have studied sexuality more generally has tended to assume that there is this thing, sexual desire, that everyone has. So I think studying asexuality calls into question a lot of wider assumptions within academia, but also within general social life.
So, Michael, how do you view your future? You're 28. I don't know what you do for work or anything, but how do you view your future?
Okay, well, I've been talking mostly about... I talked a bit about relationships, and I said that I wouldn't be happy with a relationship with somebody who is not asexual, simply because I think that relationships are two-way things, and, you know, it's very important to please somebody in a relationship. So that leaves the other possibility, seeking out a relationship with another asexual, and, I mean, that's one for the future, maybe. I mean, until recently, that would have been very difficult, because it's still difficult because asexuals are so few in number, but it's quite possible. And
there is, and we should make the distinction between asexuality, where there isn't the sexual connection, but there could be a love connection.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that relationships are not defined by whether two people are having sex. No. I mean, it's possible for people to be having sex regularly and not be in a relationship. And,
yes, that's true.
Yeah, and
as I say, there's a whole industry been made up out of that.
Yeah, and even people who are not asexual can often be in a relationship, but even if they're not having sex, I mean, they might have taken a celibacy vow until marriage, or they may be at an age where sex doesn't appeal to them anymore. That doesn't mean that they're not in a relationship anymore.
What do you hope, coming out talking publicly about this on this programme, what do you hope to achieve?
Well, I mean, what we all want is for asexuality to be recognised as a legitimate orientation, not some illness, which is sometimes portrayed as. I think this sort of opportunity is great because we can put across what asexuality really is. I mean, asexuality actually does get mentioned in the media. It was on the Jeremy Kyle show last week. I didn't watch it myself, and that has some fairly nice visibility. But I remember apparently one of the presenters said something like, asexuality is for people who don't like physical contact. Well, of course, that's nothing to do with asexuality.
You're very happy with physical contact.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, hugs are great.
Hugs are great. I'll give you a hug in a minute. Okay.
Thank you.
So, research ongoing on this. What do you hope to do with your research findings?
I've started to publish. So there'll be a book coming out in a year or two, and there's an article coming out at the start of next year. I mean, in terms of what I hope it can achieve, research suggests that up to 1 in 100 of the population are asexual, and yet until people come across the asexual community, they often feel isolated, broken. They often assume something's wrong with them that explains why they're different. And yet almost universally, I found when people meet the asexual community and get involved, they become a lot more happy in themselves. You know, they talk about in terms of, you know, coming home, working out who they are, how they fit into the world. So hopefully through research and through doing media work like this, it's possible to help spread awareness about asexuality. So people who are isolated in that way know that it's okay to be that way. There are people who are this way.
Well, we shall await the final work on the research on this. And Michael, can I wish you a very happy future? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The Guide on BBC Coventry and Warwickshire.
It's Rosie from The Guide. The British Heart Foundation do a fantastic job, and they could use your help to replenish